Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever in the world you are. And I wish you had been in our offline conversation. Elaine and I think we covered half of the things that we're going to be talking about right now in our offline conversation. We had to stop it to get live with you. But, we wanted to share these ideas with everybody. So we're very happy to be here. Elaine Pulakos, the CEO of PDRI. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. How are you doing?
Enrique, I'm doing great. I'm so excited to be here with you. Every couple of times I've talked to you, we always end up with these great conversations. So I'm excited to do this with
Yeah,
you.
yeah. No, thank you. It's a privilege to have you here. And everybody, thank you so much for joining us again in this interview series that we're doing with Hacking HR. We are bringing amazing thought leaders to not only help us think through all that is going on right now and how to be prepared to, well, survive and thrive during these times of crisis and uncertainty, but also to think a little bit about what's going to happen the day after tomorrow. I have been saying that we are, in some sort of tunnel that is really dark right now, and we always think about, the light at the end of the tunnel, and we have an opportunity right now to create that light. It's not just any light. We have the opportunity to create it, to think about how we want our organizations, our workplaces, how we want work to look like after coronavirus. And I think these conversations are critical to give us ideas on how to make that happen and how to imagine that possible future that many people have imagined in the past, but now we can make it happen. So thank you, everybody, once again for connecting, whatever in the world you are. Please let us know where you are connecting from. It would be great to see where everybody's from. Elaine, we always have people from all over the world,
Great.
Iran, Sudan, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam. It is just amazing what we can do with technology. So what a privilege to have everybody here. So please let us know where you are connecting from throughout the conversation with Elaine. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions, but if you also have questions, please feel free to post them on the chat, and I will try to bring it to the table. Well, Elaine, let's just go right into the topic of the day:
Okay.
how to build agile teams. And I think we have to backtrack a little bit to the basics, and that is the definition of agility. And that's what we were talking about offline, the definition of agility. So what is the definition that you're using when you talk about agility?
Well, we selected a definition, just one small point of clarification. We did some research, a research study that was quite a large-scale research study. It was done globally with over 300 organizations. And the reason we did this study is because we really wanted to try to pin down what is agility. Does it actually lead to anything important? So any important organizational outcomes? And then finally, what organizational conditions or characteristics lead the organization to be agile? So we were focused on actually organizational agility in our study, but I think the same characteristics can easily be applied to teams. But when we talk about agile teams, we don't mean agile teams in the same way that you think about typical agile teams that apply agile methodology. And sometimes you hear about agile leaders as well. So an agile leader is different than we're talking about. The typical agile team is different than we're talking about. What we're really focused on is what is an agile organization. And the reason we focus there is because we wanted to know if an organization is agile, does it actually produce better financial outcomes? Is it more competitively successful at the organizational level? And because those outcomes are organizational level outcomes, we defined organizational agility as a holistic concept. So finally, I'm going to answer your question, Enrique. The way we defined it is agile organizations are ones that adjust rapidly. They get out in front of change. They have effective strategies. They initiate, this is a proactive thing, they initiate effective competitive strategies that beat the competition. So that's kind of the proactive part of organizational agility. But there's also a reactive part, which is organizations that are agile bounce back very quickly. They're able to withstand jolts. they're able to return to operations mindfully, carefully, and more quickly than those that are not agile. So 2 pieces to agility in our work, a proactive one, a reactive one.
But now I want to go back. You made me curious now, because you
Okay.
defined agility, but you also set the groundwork of what agility, the research that you were looking at, to define
Yes.
agility. And part of what you said before is you asked the question, is agility, does it really drive better results in organizations? And this is a critical question, because for a long time we have been talking about an agile HR, which is our main community. And to build an agile HR, we got to be able to sell that idea to the business leaders of the organization. And to sell that idea to the business leaders of the organization, we have to be able to let them know that it really works. Right. So does agility really work?
Well, if you define it like we did, so if what you're interested in predicting, if you will, is how agile, how well the organization fends off its competitive threats, its survivability, its sustainability as a holistic organization, and how resilient the organization is going to be. Our research showed, and we collected data on over 300 companies globally. So it was a lot of companies. And what we looked at is we measured them, each company, on how agile and resilient it is. And then we looked at those agility and resilience scores, or agility scores, just to simplify it. We said, all right, are companies who are more agile, the way that we defined it, do they produce better financial outcomes? That's what we were after. And that was one part of the study. And then if yes, then what organizational characteristics, what do you have to do to make yourself agile? And here we actually found some things that I think are going to surprise you. But let's deal with the first part first. If you're high in agility and resilience, as we defined it, do you have better financial outcomes? We were amazed, Enrique, at just how strong those relationships were. People say to me, what surprised you about your research, Elaine? And I say, the fact that we got the results that we did. We never expected this agility and resilience thing that we measured to predict financial outcomes as much as they did. So here's the deal. Agile organizations have 500% more return on equity than those that are not agile. So that's pretty substantial. Yeah. We looked at return on invested capital. Didn't do so well there. Only 150 times more return on invested capital if you're agile than if you're not. And I say that tongue in cheek because 150% more is really a lot. Yeah. So basically on these key financial outcomes that organizations look at regularly, what we found is that when you measure the organization on agility as I defined it, and when you're high on that, you get much higher financial outcomes. So then we got really curious. We're like, all right, so because now the question is, how can we become agile, right, as an organization? So we looked at really a bunch of different things. We measured these 300 plus, there were like over 325 organizations. So we measured these organizations on things like, what kind of climate do you have? And do you have a solid strategy? And how high is your engagement? Because engagement is always, an important factor. So we looked at a bunch of organization level variables. We looked at 3 other ones. We looked at stability, because there had been a lot written about, stability. It's kind of paradoxical, but there were some theories that stability might be important as a foundational thing for agility. We also looked at something that we're going to call right-sized teamwork. We named this when the research was finished. But what it was about is we looked at how well the organization executed teamwork, and we found some very interesting findings that, again, are not really what you would probably expect. So I think in the last few years, organizations have gone crazy about diversity and inclusion, and these are not bad things. We got to have great teamwork. The more teamwork we have, the more agile we'll be, and so on and so forth. But what we found is that people are probably overdoing these things a bit. So in essence, too much teamwork And when you don't do that mindfully and thoughtfully and really think about how much teamwork you need for the actual work you're doing, and sometimes it's none, it's like we're over-engineering teamwork. We're doing too much of it. It's leading to complexity and confusion that isn't really that productive and actually undermines agility. So what we found is that you have to right-size teamwork, not maximize it, not overdo it, but you have to get the right type and amount of teamwork for the work you're doing. So that was a characteristic that was pretty important. And then we also measured something. We measured performance management factors. You know, what kind of formal performance management system do you have? What kind of other formal HR practices do you have? I mean, we measured a bunch of different stuff. But what we found impacted agility is the extent to which you're managing performance in real time. And you have the kind of environment where people feel comfortable raising problems and they're skilled in dealing with them. And so we called this relentless course correction, because companies who do this really well and do it all the time tend to be more agile. So I didn't say this probably as straightforwardly as I could have, but we measured a bunch of different things that we thought might lead to agility, and 3 things ended up being most important: stability, right-sized teamwork, and relentless course correction. There were some other things like engagement, climate, and strategy that had a significant impact on agility, so I won't say that they're unimportant. They did have some that, you know, positive impact. So the better you are on those things, the more agile you tend to be. But honestly, the 3 things, relentless course correction, right-sized teamwork, and stability, those 3 trumped everything else. And by far, the most important thing was stability. Stability was twice as important, had twice the impact on agility of anything else. And then next were right-sized teamwork, relentless course correction. They had about the same impact on agility, which was pretty high. And those 3 things mostly accounted for the differences in the financial results. So there's the research. We did a lot, so sorry, it kind of went on a bit, but
that's all right. I have a lot of notes and I have a lot of questions. And
okay.
You talk about organizations being agile, but organizations are people at the end of the day. I think it was Peter Senge, 40, 30 years ago saying, organizations are living organisms.
Absolutely.
That learn, move along, because they are comprised by people. So for an organization to be agile, to have stability, relentless course correction, and the right size teams, what do people, individuals, need to do to make that organization agile? And what I mean by that is not only me as an individual contributor in the organization, what my mindset needs to be for the organization to be agile, but maybe going a little further, what do business leaders and maybe HR leaders need to do to create that mindset in the organization, right, in the individuals of the organization, to make the organization agile?
Right, good. That's very good, because you're right. I mean, organizations are groups of individuals. But one thing I'd like to just share with you, because I found this a really interesting result of the study. When we asked people, how agile is your organization? How much do people in your organization, how much do they do things to stabilize the organization? How much right-sized teamwork is there? How much, you'd think that you'd get a bunch of different answers because you have a bunch of different people. But in fact, people who all rated their organization had an incredibly high level of agreement on these organizational level factors. Mm-hmm. So Ben Schneider was one of my colleagues who did this research with us, and I mentioned him, and Tracy Kantorowicz as well. One, to give them credit, but second, Ben has always he's done a ton of research in his life that's looked at climate factors, which is an organizational level factor. So the point is, these are all things that we're going to talk about now that people tend to agree on pretty highly, either exist or don't exist in the organization. So there's something there that goes beyond the individual. Now, to your point though, there are a variety of practices that individuals have to engage in. so that the organization can holistically become agile. And within each of those areas, stability, right-sized teamwork, and relentless course correction, there are specific practices, there are specific things that leaders need to do, and there are specific things that each employee needs to do. And you're absolutely correct in calling these a mindset, because first and foremost, it's having a mindset for right-sized teamwork. It's like, we're not going to overdo it. We're going to be intentional about being mindful about how many people we get in the room, how many cooks are in the kitchen, that sort of thing. When we do relentless course correction, it's a mindset that, you know, everybody's afraid to bring up the problem, right? There's always, we all know there's a problem. I mean, we've all experienced this. We can all articulate it. We all know what even is at the source of it, but nobody will talk about it. It's like the elephant in the room, because we don't want to upset anyone. We don't want to get anyone in trouble. We don't want to get anybody mad. So we let problems kind of just percolate, and then they become worse. You know, bad news doesn't get better with age is a saying of a good friend of mine, right? So it's kind of like that, but yet we don't solve them. But those organizations that collectively say, you know what, we're going to get past ourselves, we're going to get over ourselves here, and we're going to find productive ways to really confront problems and solve them, that makes you more agile. And then finally, stability. That's the one that was really the most important. There are 7 practices that will help organizations become more stable. And in turn, paradoxically, when you have a highly stable organization, it's more agile and it performs better financially.
I want to dig a little deeper into that one, because we're getting a lot of questions about the stability factor. I think, to me, maybe because I don't have the right definition, you know, when we hear stability and we hear agility, it sounds a little bit counterintuitive.
Exactly.
You know, to think that you need to be stable to be agile. So can you go a little deeper into that, you know, relationship? Because you're saying that stability is the most important factor for, you know, for the financial results,
agility.
For agility. So what is stability in the first place, and why stability is so important?
Right. Stability is, again, it's how we defined it, right? Because we measured all of this stuff, so we had to define it. So stability is really about having a stable, secure, confident workforce. So these are perceptions. It's like psychological safety, confidence, security. We can talk more about these. It's the workforce feeling all of those things, believing all of those things about their situation. So when you feel stable, it allows you to focus on the work and what you need to get done, rather than when change occurs, you become distracted and disrupted, and you actually get worried, and then you can't focus on the work. So stability is what enables you to focus and then shift quickly, adopt new strategies and those things fearlessly. And that's why stability leads to agility. And let me just give you a real quick example, because as a human being, we can relate to this. When you're stressed or tired or upset, and one more thing's hit you, how do you feel?
Overwhelmed.
Right, overwhelmed. But if you're on top of your game and you're feeling great and you think you're looking really good and you're ready to go out and kill the world, and something hits you, how do you feel?
Just one more thing coming in, and you know, I just keep, you know, trudging along.
That's it. That's why stability enables agility, because when organizations are secure, things are going well, people are feeling great, they're excited, they're optimistic, they can focus on work and get things done. If they're all distracted by worry and fear about what's going to happen, then you know what? They have performance decrements.
So let me ask you this question, because I think you probably see it coming, and I'm going to ask it. Can we be agile in terms of coronavirus then?
Well, I think we can, and we see this because if you look at some of the leaders and what they're doing, I love watching certain people. And I can mention some names. I probably won't mention all the names, but there are certain people who do things that are incredibly destabilizing according to our research, like the list of what you should do, consistent communications, build optimism, reassure people, but do it in credible ways, not ways that are not believable. Those things, when you do it in a way that's not believable, when you have inconsistent communications, those are destabilizing. But you look at, and I'll say a few of my favorite stabilizers, me and everybody else, this is not like I'm unique here, but Dr. Anthony Fauci, if you look at how he conducts himself, he's matter of fact, he'll give you the facts, but he does have reassurance and optimism in his communications. He tells you what the plan is. He tells you how we're doing against the plan. He's candid. He's very stabilizing because people know kind of what to do. And he has that credibility. And then even when he's wrong, we're okay with that because nobody's right 100% of the time. And as long as we continue the conversation, we understand what went wrong or what changed and what we need to do differently, that's fine. That's stabilizing because it's communication and information that helps us get through it. Cuomo, the governor of New York, he builds, and I was just looking at one of his, he does his daily briefings, and he had one where he was talking about all the people that were helping New York, how many medical workers, how many psychologists and psychiatrists were coming in there, emergency techs and whatnot, just to help New York. And the way he was talking about it, I mean, you have to watch this. It was a few days ago, his briefing. The way he was talking about it built optimism, was very reassuring for people. It's like, we can get through this, help is here, and that's stabilizing. So again, there's 7, we call them the stable 7. There's 7 things. And by the way, unlike right-sized teamwork and relentless course correction, those are things that everybody in the organization needs to do in order to build a sufficient mass of agility, for lack of a better way to state it. But when it comes to stability, that's something leaders need to do. And it's leaders at all levels, starting at the top, cascading down.
Let me ask you, and of course, I don't want to get political here or anything, but I think thinking about the stabilizers, people who don't build that stability. And, one of them was asked, why we didn't say before the seriousness, well, we didn't talk before about the seriousness of the coronavirus. And what he said was, it's because I wanted people to stay calm. But in reality, my question goes to, what's the right balance to build agility and agile organizations? What's the right balance between telling people the truth so that we can start from a place of awareness, saying, this is falling apart and we got to do the right things for, to bring all the parts together again, or just hiding that under the rug and then letting sort of the outcomes, the negative outcomes, show up way later, but at a larger scale than if we had addressed those things from the beginning. So what's the right balance between that level of optimism, but also that level of, hey, this is what's happening and this is the reality. Now let's work on it.
Yeah, different leaders have different styles, but just as a couple general rules here, and you can see this, like if you look at Angela Merkel, she has a different way of communicating and she's stabilizing and she says some very blunt things that, and so does Cuomo. He'll say, things like, we're going to have a really bad day here today, et cetera, but it's balanced, and I think what's important to be stabilizing is to be honest with people, to explain what you know and what you don't know. Now, as a leader, you also have to make wise decisions about what you're going to tell people and what you're not going to tell people, because that needs to be part of just your general communication planning. But credibility is important for stability. If people think that you're sugarcoating it, if you're not telling them the truth, then that's going to be destabilizing because they're not going to trust what you have to say. So that's a problem. If you don't communicate at all, people are going to think the worst. That's destabilizing. So the best thing you can do is be candid. You tell people what you know and what you don't know, what we think is the best thing to do today and why, that we have a plan. Here's our plan. Here's what we're going to do. And then we're going to collect data. We're going to monitor it. We're going to let the data inform our next steps. And people can deal with that because then they too have a plan. And they can look forward to when they're going to know more. People don't expect, and this is, the same, this is, in a sense, it's a terrible thing that happened, obviously, with this coronavirus, but it really highlights and pinpoints so clearly how to stabilize and destabilize. I mean, I can give you very clear examples of all 7 things that just came to the forefront with so much vigor almost as I just watched this whole coronavirus situation unfold, because it really, it shows these stability principles at work literally every single day.
Yeah.
But to your point, you can't not be credible in your communications, because that will be destabilizing, you know.
Absolutely. Let me go back to the 3 factors that help or are the foundation of building an agile organization: stability, the right team, the right size of teams,
right size teamwork,
right size teamwork, and relentless course correction.
Course correction. We may need better titles, Enrique, if you can
maybe one word.
Help me with that. Yeah,
I am happy to help you with that.
People, send us your thoughts. We're not good at naming. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's all right. So for these 3 factors at the organizational level, I guess my guess is you have to live and breathe those values throughout the entire organization, both at the larger level, C-suite level, but also at the level of the smaller team within the organization. So the big question of this conversation that we're having today is how to build agile teams, which is perhaps what the smallest unit within an organization to make things happen, to produce results. So how can we promote and make these 3 things happen at the team level? Stability, course correction, relentless course correction, and having the right size teamwork.
Yeah. Well, the stability factors, again, are things that primarily leaders are going to do. And there's a number of them. I'm just going to run through them real quickly.
Yeah.
Helping to break down barriers, sharpen focus. Leaders need to harmonize resources. That's make sure, it's not doing more with less necessarily. It's having the right resources to get the job done efficiently. It's building optimism. It's reassuring people. It's optimizing failure. It's allowing for failure to occur, but then turning it, finding a silver lining in it, because that's stabilizing. It's like, and not finger pointing and blaming. There's been a lot of discussion about that. And then planning recovery and pre-planning recovery, because you build confidence that stabilizes when people really believe that no matter what hits us, we've had practice planning. We know we can get out of a mess. And so no matter what hits us, which is going to be unpredictable, we'll figure our way out of it. It's that confidence that's stabilizing. Leaders are going to have to drive all of those things and mostly do those things. When it comes to right-sized teamwork, there's actually some pretty simple principles there, which is really think about the work and how to get it done most efficiently. And this is not about, this isn't telling companies don't collaborate, don't have diversity, inclusion, et cetera, et cetera. But what it's saying is be mindful and get the right people in at the right time to do the job, rather than what we normally do, which is, our default is stand up a diverse team these days, because we've been so big about teamwork and talking about it and, lauding it and et cetera. But really, just taking an unbridled approach to teamwork. We need to get something done. Let's get a bunch of people in a room. Let's figure out. Teamwork takes on a life of its own, and guess what? You create inefficiencies, a lot of cooks in the kitchen, people step on each other's toes. You get all kinds of, complicated things going on. So that particular principle or practice is something that really everybody in the organization needs to learn. And it's kind of simple. It's just, let's be mindful and thoughtful about who we really need to do this and when we're going to engage other people and how. And let's not just throw everybody in the blender and hope that, something good comes out of it, because it doesn't. Relentless course correction, we've been trying to get after that with our more modern performance management practices, things like real-time feedback, expectations that adjust in the moment. So a lot of the themes that are related to relentless course correction, we've kind of been dealing with in performance management. However, relentless course correction is really about taking it a step further. And it's about teaching everyone in the organization how to raise performance issues. And there are some good techniques for this, like the 5 whys, Six Sigma, and there are other techniques that really help people. you know, I said earlier, it's like you have a performance problem, it's the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to bring it up, but everybody knows it's there. So how do you get people to cross the line to feel comfortable bringing it up? And that's everybody deciding we're going to do this together. It's about giving people permission to do it. It's about giving them some skill sets, some techniques and methods for how to raise the problem and then how to work it through to its end conclusion. Because here's the thing, and here's why it really is important for agility. When you have a performance problem that's getting in your way and blocking success, you're not going to be agile. It's going to actually undermine agility because you're going to be stuck. So until you unstick that performance problem and get it resolved, you're not going to be able to get agile because you're stuck. So it's about explaining to people like how agility works, how important it is, and what we need to do collectively to create it. And that is, you know, raise your hand and work through performance issues, get them solved quickly and efficiently. It's kind of interesting because today, because there is a lot of teamwork and interconnected work, many of the performance problems actually occur in the process or in the way that work is interconnected. They're not so much, you know, if you just go get better communication skills, then all our problems are going to be solved. It's not a competency-based thing so much because work, it's knowledge work, it's interconnected, it's complex. So the performance problems we're seeing today tend to be more around how do we line up work and connect it in the right ways to be seamless and effective, not so much about, you know, Johnny or Susie needs to go improve their communication skills. Now, from development perspective, yeah, of course, that's going to be important. But when you think about the things that really bring down work and get in the way, it's more these process and these how we're connecting things up and inefficiencies of teamwork and over collaborating and these kinds of things. So we have to clean up those blockers. And that's everybody just understanding that it's, you know, get over your fears. We got to get over ourselves. And we just have to focus on what we need to do to be agile, which is solve performance problems and get them out of the way. I mean, these things are all, they're common sense. I mean, I think they're common sense. They're logical, but we don't really focus on them. And the fact that they came out in our research was amazing. They told that we didn't necessarily expect these things, but you know, they make a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, I want to go back to the question of the situation that we're going through right now and agility. We, you know, based on what I'm getting out of this conversation, the role of leadership to build an agile organization or an agile team is fundamental. I mean, it's fundamental for everything, but especially to build an agile team, especially if they have to promote more stability.
Right.
I see a lot of business leaders concerned, you know, for what's going on. They don't even know if they're going to survive tomorrow or next week. And what, you know, from my conversations and what I've seen is they are trying to shoot in different directions, you know, to try to to survive through this crisis. So that means that it may be more difficult for them to build their stability in their business because they have to go, you know, to different places to, you know, to ensure the longevity of their organization. So what's your message for those leaders that are trying to survive today, but at the same time, they might have a little bit in the back burner that they want to be around, you know, next year as well? What's your message for them to build, you know, their agile organization today and also, you know, for post-COVID era? And I'm going to add one more question to that, or a second part question to that question. And maybe, I don't know if I may be mistaken, but a lot of the things that we're talking about seem to be very applicable for organizations that are in the knowledge, creative kind of economy. Do these concepts apply for a restaurant, for example? Do these concepts apply for, you know, for for a business that operates on the brick and mortar retail space and whatnot? So two-part question in there.
So you may have to remind me of the questions because I'll try to answer.
First one is your message to leaders.
Right. So the message to leaders is pretty straightforward, I think. And you see this in what we're seeing every single day on TV. Look at, and we already talked about this, look at how Andrew Cuomo is handling a very difficult situation in New York City. He's doing absolutely every single one of the stable 7 things we've called them the stable 7, that leaders need to do to stabilize situations. And even though he's dealing with a mess, and so is Anthony Fauci. I mean, if you think about this, and Dr. Bricks, all of these people are dealing with enormous challenges right now. They are extremely disruptive, and they hit us overnight unexpectedly. But yet, when you look at how they're behaving, they're actually the good leaders are doing those things to stabilize the situation, even though they don't know what's going to come tomorrow and what kind of bad things they're going to have to deal with. So in a sense, I mean, I think for organizational leaders, even though they're worried about tomorrow, this is why you're a leader. If you want to see that tomorrow, the best way to get there is to stabilize today, because you don't want to lose all your talent. You don't want people to go running. You don't want your organization to implode. You're trying to hold it together. And the best way to do that is to stabilize, because you can't do it by yourself. You need the people focusing on helping you get to that next phase, to that future. And that's why this is so essential for leaders to do. I mean, I have to tell you, with my own teams, after I did this research, I kind of thought about, we've been acquired 8 times. It's been a lot of disruption in a pretty short amount of time. And as I thought about how did I stabilize my teams through all this, and by the way, every time, it wasn't nearly at the level of, the coronavirus, I mean, obviously, but, every time we got acquired, we had to shift our strategy one way or another. So there was a lot of disruption associated with it. And I looked at the 7 things and I said, how well have I shown up as a leader around these 7 things? And, on some of them, quite frankly, I hadn't, because I really didn't know they were important. This time we've done this research, and I decided to drink some of my own Kool-Aid, and I really focused on these 7 things. And I think I did them better, not perfect. There's room for improvement. But I think I did them better than I have in the past. And I honestly think they made a difference. And why? Because of how people responded to what I was doing. And I was all about, I just kept asking myself every day, what do I need to do to stabilize this situation? Reassure people, build optimism where I can credibly. And people seem to have come through this pretty well. So I do think these things are important now for leaders, even though they're dealing with challenges ahead. Okay, second part of your question.
Second part of the question is, are these concepts applicable across the board?
Oh, yeah, right.
I just want to give you the example, the basic example of a restaurant, because they have a reality that is very different from, a consulting company or a software company and whatnot. Do these concepts apply for those kind of organizations that are more, living on a very day-to-day reality and they are maybe in the retail space and service space?
So, I don't know why they wouldn't be. And our research, you think we didn't just look at knowledge companies or innovation companies. We looked at everything from government. We didn't have outcome data for every organization. We had some government organizations, we had some nonprofits. We had organizations that represented every major type of organization that you see, listed in taxonomies of different types of work, that were their main brands. I mean, we had organizations that were basically agricultural, IT, manufacturing, so on and so forth. So we had a good cross section. And there were no different, now we didn't have probably enough to look at whether there were differences by organization type, but we didn't notice anything systematic in the data that said, oh, this only applies like if you're an IT company. But if you think about it, the things that our research found are very basic and they're kind of common sense. And if you're in a service organization or you're working retail and you've got a problem, why wouldn't you want to address it quickly? Because if you don't, it's going to fester and get in your way. And that's relentless course correction. So it kind of applies no matter what. If you're working with team members and you're not really thinking mindfully at the start, who do I need to involve? Who's best to involve? How many people do I really need? You hear all kinds of stuff. Stephen Rogelberg is, a friend and colleague. He wrote the book on teams. It's so popular now. And, we're suffering with all of this overdoing teamwork and not doing teamwork right and this and that. And that applies to everybody. It's not just, certain types of organizations. So this idea of right-sized teamwork is kind of, it really is about, let's get the right people in the room and involved for the job at the right times so that we can be efficient and not create monsters here, not overdo teamwork, not overdo collaboration, not burn people out because we're making work harder than it should be. That applies everywhere.
Yeah.
And stability is such a fundamental concept. I mean, if you think about its components, optimizing failure, reassuring people, building optimism, I mean, it's probably actually more important to do that in some of the industries that are suffering the most. And if you think about those are retail, they are restaurant workers, they are, you know, I mean, they've got some of the toughest jobs of any of us, quite frankly, right now.
I went to, we have a few extra minutes, and you know, there are
Sure.
2 or 3 other questions that I want to ask you. And I got to say, for everybody who's connected online, thank you so much for being here. We're talking about how to build agile teams with Elaine Pulakos. And I know there's a lot of comments in there. I'm not even looking anymore. There's so much conversation.
Let me ask you this, Enrique, are they all bad? Are they all good?
They're fantastic.
Hey, I mean,
fantastic.
like I want to see.
You know, they're fantastic. It's just that there are so many coming so quickly, so you know, in an agile fashion that I just
ignore them.
I'm ignoring them. Yeah,
this
is not what Elaine is recommending, by the way. But I'm not ignoring you, but just for a little bit because it's a lot of stuff going on in there. Fantastic comments, feedback, of course, lots of questions. I'm going to try to you know bring back some of them. But I want to ask you, you know, 2 or 3 questions at, you know, at the end of this conversation, or getting to the end of this conversation. One of them is, you just mentioned that, you know, you were trying to do the 7 things for stability, and you did, you know, some of them you did well, some of them, you know, they still need some work, you know, and whatnot. So I want to bring back this concept of imperfection and agility. And maybe, you know, I'm going to throw in there innovation as well. Is agility, you know, does agility go hand in hand with imperfection? You know, that in the sense that as you're building an agile organization, you know, relentless course correction, for example, means that you're going in one way one day, and maybe you're correcting to another way, and that's not the way either. So that means that you know, it's an imperfect sort of ongoing process of decision making. So what's the relationship between that imperfection that you talked about before, agility, and, you know, producing innovation out of that process?
I think they all go together. And, you know, one of the things in stability, one of the key practices is how to optimize failure. Because, I mean, let's face it, before this all happened with coronavirus, there was a very strong case to be made for agility before this happened. This kind of accentuated or punctuated the point. We probably didn't need quite that much punctuation, but nonetheless, I mean, agility has also been important for the past 5 or so years. And why? It's because there's so much disruptive change going on in the world. There's so much competitive threat, and it's moving so quickly that I don't care what kind of organization you are, you're under pressure. Products are changing in dramatic ways to the point where, you know, what you had yesterday may not even be, you know, it's been trumped by somebody else in the market today. So, and even if you're in the restaurant business or something like that, I mean, you've got to be doing something to up your game constantly because there's so much competition and things are moving quickly. So agility is very, very important, I think, anyway. It's not just for this coronavirus, but to be agile in general, you got to try new things. You got to come up with the next way that you're going to compete in the market.
That's risky, that brings imperfection, you know,
right.
That's innovative
and so
by nature.
You're trying, you're failing. And, you know, if you think about it, I mean, Jeff Bezos, Amazon is probably, you know, one of the kings out there talking about how important it is to fail quickly, learn, and move on. Amy Edmondson, that's a lot of what she talks about. So there's a lot of people who talk about the importance of, you know, try new things, do it on a scale that's appropriate, fail, learn, and that's how you're going to get ahead. So yes, it's like we're all a constant work in progress, I think, on this, because we all have to rapidly adjust. I never expected something like COVID-19 to come along because, like I said, that's kind of the nth degree of making the point that we probably really didn't need, but we definitely didn't need it. But it kind of brings all this to roost for all of us. Every single day we think we're in control, we think it's predictable, but it actually really isn't, you know? And stuff happens every day, and companies and people have to find their way much more rapidly than they did in the past. Absolutely. And much more agilely.
I'm going to ask you one last question before I let you go and I let everybody go. You know, I am a competitive runner, and right now we are in, you know, stay at home kind of, you know, orders, right? And so, you know, people who coach runners, they can't tell the runners, you know, to get better, you got to go out and run outside, because you can't do that. So they got to come up with a different set of recommendations based on the circumstances that we are going through right now. I guess the same thing applies for, and I know that the same thing applies for everything else in life, that, you know, you will have to, you know, when we advise people on what to do about either agility, innovation, whatever it is, it has to be bound by some circumstances, you know, some you know, some things that we're going through. So I know that you have a number of recommendations for organizations and leaders to become more agile. For HR, what are your recommendations for HR, given the circumstances that we're going through right now, to build agile teams? So it's very, you know, it's like within the context in which we're operating today.
For me, I do think this stability idea is the foundation. You need that first and foremost. And I think HR, you know, some leaders will know this naturally. We see it every day. But I do think HR getting up to speed on how to help stabilize the organization and help leaders understand what's required is going to be really important. The other two, relentless course correction and right-sized teamwork, I think those are going to be important as we start getting back to work and coming out of this. And again, I think for HR, it's helping to enable the organization on these behaviors, principles. I mean, ultimately, HR is going to play a big role. It has to be driven by leaders, but HR is going to be an incredibly important partner in that. And I think, Enrique, that when I think about where like right-sized teamwork comes in, is people get back to work and we have to be developing new strategies. There's going to be a new normal, and we don't know what it is yet. That's the problem. Nobody quite knows what we're going to do and how things are going to change when we go back to work. So every day stuff is going to come up, and you're going to have to figure it out. Well, at that point in time, not having work get bogged down, having work get done efficiently is going to be really important, because we've got to go create a new normal for ourselves. So if it's bogged down by collaboration overload, too much teamwork, problems that aren't getting resolved because we just don't know how to bring them up and resolve them, that's going to get in our way even more. And it's going to be a bigger problem than it is with business as usual, because it's not business as usual. We're going to need all of our resources, all of our people focused and in the right frame of mind, and with the right mindset to help every organization succeed, because there's so much concern out there, and rightly so, that many companies, especially small, just aren't going to be able to make it through this. So then what? You know, this is where you really want to buckle down, and, you know, you want to double down on this idea of efficiency. Let's get the right people in the room. Let's not waste time. Let's not swirl where we don't need to. Let's not have bad behavior by people at work. And let's, you know, we are all in this together, and these are some principles that can help us get through it as best we can. It's not a panacea. It's not going to guarantee survival. But, you know, what else are you going to do? I mean, we've got to approach this as efficiently and effectively as we can to get the job done, or we're going to be in a worse world of hurt than, you know, unfortunately we already are.
Yeah. No, that's powerful. Elaine, thank you so much. And